Did you know that most of the wealth that exists in the world today is owned and controlled by large corporations? Well, it's true. In recent years, corporate giants like Walmart and General Motors now share 51% of the entire global economy. These big companies now have more economic power than they have had in the past, and some people think that the benefits of these corporations can provide to society are trivial compared to how much power they have and how they could potentially use it. Nonprofit organizations in particular have made little progress in working on this power imbalance. Part of this is because nonprofits depend so much on private donations, and sometimes they feel compelled to manipulate their policies to comply with the demands of larger corporate donors. As corporations grow and become larger, workers tend to be the ones who bear the brunt of responsibility in making sure things stay flowing. More and more employees are expected to reach unrealistically high financial targets while still keeping unrealistically high production standards. It's also a fact that employees are working harder and for longer hours than they have had in the past. Labor unions are one way employees can fight against unfair practices when feeling like they're being taken advantage of. But labor unions are now receiving increased backlash, including corporation owners hiring out consultants to run anti-union campaigns. This is leading to diminishing rights of workers, and it's a threat to traditional means of employee representation. Some organizational communication scholars say that there's a need to advocate for a more balanced system of power among citizens, organizations, and workers worldwide, or else those in charge are going to maintain the status quo. Since we're all smart people here, let's not just look at work trends. Let's check out what the research says. According to studies, employees who have little control over their work life experience serious negative personal outcomes, including anxiety, stress, and physical and/or mental problems. Additionally, research has shown that employees who have little power in the workplace may become violent or destructive. Contrast this to studies which reveal that in democratic organizations, in which employee participation and representation are encouraged, workers typically are more positive, productive, and emotionally healthy. Let's also take into account a word from Habermas, a German philosopher and member of the Frankfurt School of Thought, which, if you haven't heard of yet, you need to look it up sometime. Habermas argued that power is created and perpetuated through discourse, in other words, through speech and our everyday communications. He followed this up by stating that discourse that protects privileged groups is difficult to reveal or overcome, mostly because of taken for granted norms. Let's also consider a quote from Dietz in 1995. Dietz said that the central goal of critical theory in organizational communication studies has been to create a society and workplaces that are free from domination and where all members can contribute equally to produce systems that meet human needs and lead to the progressive development of all. Communication scholars have argued that in specifically challenging culturally designed assumptions about privileged and non-privileged groups, individuals can begin to change social structures, thereby planting seeds of social activism. The goal then is to create an ideal speech situation, one in which all workers feel they can say what they need to say and the group negotiate power within an organization to make it more fair. Back to Ritchie. She said that organizational communication scholarship suffers from its major weakness in its failure to successfully advocate for workers. They have kept it to the realm of theory, but not provided practical means of making these changes or attempting to make them, sticking instead to a passive observer role. These thoughts led Ritchie to her case study. In this study, Ritchie used a variety of methods to decentralize power at the Massachusetts-based Neighborhood Center, MNC, which it's important to note here is a pseudonym for a real nonprofit community organization. Although successful in some ways, the project created many tensions along the way. MNC was a faith-based organization that had been successful for the last 97 years, but, quote, recently fallen on difficult financial times due to membership volume, declining donations, and competition, end quote. On top of this, hostility between different hierarchical groups or different categories of workers in the organization was making it a volatile place to work, enough so that the primary supervisor called Ritchie in as a consultant to reorganize the way employees interacted with one another. Ritchie and her students began helping by conducting focus groups with all employees. In these small groups, Ritchie asked employees to give their opinions about the organization. She encouraged them to provide both positive and negative evaluations of their managers. However, Ritchie found that employees were hesitant to say anything negative. This made sense, since MNC was a traditional bureaucracy. Employees were possibly afraid, considering things like, would the managers retaliate if they heard anything they didn't like? Would the employees lose privileges, or would they receive the cold shoulder from other workers or from their supervisors? Ultimately, Ritchie found that there were three main practices at this organization that were leading to hostility between the different groups of employees. 1. Self-silencing. Employees had gotten used to filtering what they said and felt the managers were ostracizing outspoken individuals. 2. Interpersonal distance. One employee remarked of the higher-ups that some go out of their way to avoid us. 3. Lack of trust. Because of the lack of opportunities at the organization at the time, as well as the already mentioned factors, stereotyping, and fear, a culture of distrust had emerged at MNC. Richie also brought up a great point at the end of her article. She said that many times when employees are overmanaged, they see themselves as being ineffective or treated like a child. You can see how this could be discouraging. Richie's way of handling the situation was through beginning company conversations and trainings. Ultimately, both groups, staff and managers, agreed that they needed to work on negotiating for changes within the organization. This is but one example of how dialogue can be initiated and used to create a more effective, fair, team-oriented workplace.